that's going to flip in 2012. You've got a precession of the equinoxes, which we're actually starting into now and will kind of culminate on or after 2012. It's not on a precise date. And we also have proof now of another cycle that's coming in that's roughly every 36 to 3,800 years of an incoming dwarf star that's estimated between 5 and 20 Earth masses that is now between the inner solar system below the ecliptic, or the plane in which the planets rotate around the solar system, and coming in now not in the outer solar system but between Jupiter and the asteroid belt. So we've got evidence from the Chandra X-ray satellite. We've got evidence from IRAS, which is the infrared satellite system. We have evidence from the South Pole Telescope, both it's in public domain, you can go online, but also I have sources that are classified.
And there's another satellite being launched which is called WISE, isn't there? Can you tell us anything about that? Do you know about that one?
It's called Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer.
Good job.
It's for the nearest and coolest stars, origins of stellar, and of course it's also to watch for this incoming thing. So the WISE satellite, and they actually have pictures of it here. If you actually go online, you can see pictures of it. And NASA and the Jet Propulsion Lab here in California is monitoring it. JPL.
Okay.
JPL NASA, yeah. And of course the WISE satellite's very important. People should understand what they're doing is they're monitoring this because they know this object is coming in. And it's coming in from the constellation Scorpio. And now Dr. Harrington, who was a senior astronomer back in the 90s, discovered this, and he went down to Auckland, New Zealand. He went to Australia, and he actually found evidence that, in fact, was already published back over 16, 18 years ago, that there was, in fact, quote, a dwarf star. I don't like to call it Planet X because it's not a planet. It's a dwarf star.
Yep.
It has an infrared signature, which you can pick up, and it has an X-ray signature, but it doesn't give off visible light, so you can't see it unless you use infrared, or even better still, X-ray.
Yep.
Infrared and X-ray are the only ways to see this. You can also see it if it perturbs or starts to move, as it's moving now through the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Mars, where there's a giant belt of asteroids that is likely to perturb or move them, or even to pull some of them with it, because it's got quite a mass.
Right. But they don't know what this thing's going to do they, Dr. Bill? This is the problem, isn't it? They don't know what it's going to do.
Yeah, I think they do, actually.
Oh, they do?
And I'll tell you, I'm going to give you the list now, and I'll tell you, if we do get evidence both in the public or private domain, that's why this information is not only for the public, but also for scientists to take these theories and go back and use them.
Okay.
So we've got these converging cycles. We know that with the precession of the equinox, this is in the geological record, we have that. We know that the sun flips every 11 years, which is going to occur 2012. And we know that there's this incoming object that's also approaching. So we've got a bunch, it's like one of those triple, convergences of things that are happening at the same time. One is the cycle of 11,500 years. Another, by the way, we're also in time for the 105,000-year big ice age as well. So the long cycle, the short cycle, the shorter cycle, which is the 350-year cycle for ice ages, the mini ice age cycle, we're also converging in that one. That's according to Robert Felix and other experts. We're having, according to the research center, the Geomagnetic Research Center in Johannesburg, South Africa, there's a giant rent to the magnetic field from the tip of South Africa all the way to Antarctica. And we have already happened since 97. He's speeding up because I've been monitoring the magnetic North Pole. It was in northern Canada, and over the last century, of the 20th century, it moved at roughly 10 kilometers per year northwest towards Siberia. That magnetic north now speeded up since 97 to 41 to 43 kilometers per year, moving towards Siberia. And the best way to think of this, and this is all science, think of the Earth as three revolving spheres. The outside sphere is the crust and the upper mantle. Okay?
Yep.
And the crust and the upper mantle are kind of locked together. So you'll find hot spots like the hot spot in Hawaii, and there is a slight slippage there, but that hot spot makes the islands, and if you go over millions of years, you'll see it makes new islands depending on where the hot spot is that's feeding magma up through the very thin crust in Hawaiian Islands in the middle of the Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yep.
There are also other spots where they're creating giant, we call supervolcanoes. Like, for example, there's enough volcanic material in Mauna Loa to make a I think it's 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet wide that covers the entire planet with magma 2,000 feet high. So there's a lot of magma there.
Yep.
Right?
I can believe it.
And then we've got other major supervolcanoes. We've got one in Ecuador. We've got, of course, the one in the Yellowstone Park. We've got supervolcanoes in other places around the world. So I think about around 7 or 8 or 9 big ones. And we've got some super big volcanoes like the Mount Erebus volcano in Antarctica, which is one of the biggest volcanoes on the planet. But the biggest volcano overall is Mauna Loa.
Okay.
Now, what's happening, we're noticing that all these earthquakes, people are noticing, and to videotaping, they can see plasma discharges. Those plasma discharges indicate the Earth is releasing plasma just before. Now, Stan Deyo told me this 3 or 4 years ago, that he'd been researching. He worked actually with Edward Teller at the research facility in gravitonics near Pine Gap, Australia, back in the 70s, and he's one of their kind of junior scientists. And they're using what's called electrogravitonics for flight, which is the basis behind the TR-3B and our advanced spaceflight vehicles. They're not based on propulsion like the ramjet or our typical rockets or whatever. Right. They're based on electrogravitonics and other technologies like, space-time effects, etc.
Yep.
What happened is he, up to 2 years ago, was getting more and more accurate at making predictions of where earthquakes would be because he's using U.S. naval satellite data of infrared satellite pictures that would show the heat of the oceans. And he overlaid maps of where the tectonic plates were underneath the ocean and would extend those plates toward the land and tell you where the earthquakes or the sea quakes would happen. And the way he would do it is real simple. Across those fault lines, there would be a temperature difference of so much tenths of a degree or more from one side of the fault line to another, which would indicate there's a plasma which would differentially heat one side more than the other side in the energy because there's a flow where energy is going down on one side of the fault line and up on the other side, so it would create a heating on one side and a cooling on the other.
Okay.
So there would be an actual flow of water, a flow of ions or plasma, and a differential heating on either side of this fault line. Okay. So 2 years ago, the Navy cut him off. Now, he was getting really accurate at predicting where the earthquakes would be. Like, sometimes with the bigger quakes, like 90% or more.
I remember that, yes, I remember
75 to 90, he was telling me somewhere between 75 and 92% of big earthquakes, and if he had a fault line that would extend into the land, he could tell you pretty accurately, that was going to happen. Because you could just see the data just developing literally hour by hour because you could go log online and see it. And the government cut him off, and I don't know why. Obviously, they didn't want him using this home system to accurately predict a given model to other scientists that would allow them to see if there were other, technologies used to turn the Earth into a weapon of mass destruction. Because the Sichuan quake was a earthquake weapon unleashed on the Chinese by us. And I talked to Ben Fulford before they unleashed that earthquake that struck that Japanese reactor near Osaka. He told me beforehand that he met the finance minister, and they told him afterwards, that they didn't turn over the financial control to the Rockefeller Rothschild cabal. They were going to hit him with a tectonic weapon, and they actually focused it directly at the reactor core of a giant reactor, one of the biggest 7 reactors in Japan, sitting right over a fault line, which wasn't a good place to build it. And they hit it, and they broke the reactor core. So they had to evacuate, I think, a couple 100,000 people that were in the immediate area that were going to get exposed to radioisotopes. And then he told me, and then I interviewed him afterwards. So this isn't conjecture. So each of these things I'm building. So the big aha this Monday was this. I knew there was this precession effect. I knew there was this, the book to get is, by the way, from IceAgeNow.com, Robert Felix. He's got 2 books, one called Not by Fire But by Ice, which means we're not going to go into a firestorm so much, although there may be some cosmic and X-ray and other things, but we're going to have an ice age. And there's evidence that we're heading into an ice age with increased rainfall that's driven by volcanism, earthquakes, and increased rainfall. And the rainfall drives the ice ages to the northern latitudes, which means you melt the ice from 2 effects. You melt it from below, like the Deagle Range, which is a range of volcanic mountain peaks in the Arctic, which is around Iceland in the Arctic Circle, 1,500 kilometers long. And you also melt it from high-energy ultraviolet light because the ozone layer is thinned, because the ozone is created by an interaction between